Welcome back, everyone, for the final session of day one. And I am delighted to introduce the first in a new series of webinars that we will be running, looking at the recent history of retail through the eyes of the leaders that shaped it. And for this inaugural episode, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by a figure, one of the great figures of British grocery of the last 10 years, a man who was CEO of Asda, really set the pace of transformational change at the start of the decade. Welcome, Andy Clarke. And Andy, fabulous to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's great to be involved, and of course, the Retail Trust and you chairing it, leading it, you taking it through your own level of transformation. So it's good to be a part of it.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, look, I wanted to start off very quickly, really, on what's going on right now before we look back at your career and the things that shaped that. And just ask you, change has always been part and parcel of retail. You would know this better than anyone, but is what we are seeing now something different? And is the industry going to be recognizable from the sector that you've been part of for all your life?
Well, I mean, look, we're in, it's an overused phrase, but we're in unprecedented times, aren't we? The scenes that we saw at the start of lockdown, I think, shocked everybody, but the retailers, didn't matter which brand it was above the door, just did a fantastic job, pulled together, and of course made sure that the customer got what he or she needed. And that's been, I guess, an element of survival, certainly for those early few weeks. But as we've come through the sort of second half of the COVID crisis, then consumer behaviour continues to change. A biggest shift, of course, is online. That we saw I think somebody quoted a statistic of it took 25 years to get to 7% market share for online grocery.
Yeah.
And it took 7 weeks to get to 12%. So, the shape of the industry has fundamentally changed forever. How big will it become in terms of online presence? There's lots of second guessing going on. However, investments are starting to flow. And I guess the challenge for all of the grocers in particular, and of course it's not only about grocery, the fashion and the general merchandise sector has probably suffered more through the last 6 months than the food sector. And it's the relationship between retail floor space and the online transfer that, the customer is king or queen.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
That's not going to change, and the retailers have to adapt with that.
Indeed. Andy, we've known each other, many years now, and you've always spoken so very passionately about the industry. Looking back to your early days and your early career, were you always destined to be a retailer?
Goodness, I don't think my father would have said that at the age of 16 when I failed all my exams, and he sort of sat me down and said, "Goodness, what are you going to do now? Are you going to go back to school, or are you going to get a job?" And it just so happened that I sort of had a part-time job in a local fine fair, a brand that's long since gone. And I knocked on the store manager's door and said, give us a job. The guy, the general manager, looked after me. He decided that he wanted to take me on. And so I joined as a full-time assistant. And who knew that at the age of 16? That I would sort of enjoy the industry as I have.
Yeah.
And I guess I sort of found a bent towards it. I always loved working in teams. I was a very keen sportsman through my school life. And being a part of a team, leading teams, I think, the retail industry, it played to my strengths, even in those early years. So, I look back on that sort of conversation with a guy called Dennis Lever, who was the store manager. And, I'll never forget it because he was foundational in determining my career. Not only just giving me a job, but, setting me out on my journey, which, of course, ended up being for, 40 years. It's hard to say that, actually. We've grown grey together. Haven't we?
Absolutely.
40 years has been my involvement in the retail sector.
How important were those sorts of mentors then throughout your career? And were there others at sort of seminal points in your career, do you think?
Oh, definitely. So, I started with Fine Fair. I then went to work for William Morrison's, from William Morrison's to Asda, and then on from there. So, I can, vividly remember the Dennis Lever types through my career. So, there's no doubt that, Archie Norman, Alan Leighton played an important part in my Asda early career. Ken Morrison, when I joined Morrison, they had 30 stores. And I opened a store in Grantham in Lincolnshire as a grocery manager. And Ken would come in his tank top and his sleeves rolled up, and he'd be, he would be educating you. So at the age of, I would be something like 18 when I was working for Morrison's, they were all, great, mentors is an overused term. They were just somebody who coached you as well. So, throughout my career, I've been blessed really with working with some great people, not only, the leaders of those organisations, but people I worked with. Whether it was a lady who ran or looked after the general merchandise section in a store in Leeds, or as I say, somebody like gave his own form of mentoring to all of us. We all learned a lot through, his way of working, along with his top team. And I think as you move on and work with other companies and other people, you choose those individuals who you can gain something from, always looking for those golden nuggets. What is it that makes those people special that you can cherry pick and think, you don't want to copy them because you've got to be your own person. There's no point in trying to copy somebody else. But taking a few of those little golden nuggets and using them to help you in terms of how you manage the different roles that you have or the businesses that you're involved in.
Andy, how early in your career did you start to see a path in retail, a career path, and how purposeful were you about following it and carving it out?
I think in those very early days at Fine Fair, actually. So I was very fortunate in the 2 years that I spent with that business, which wasn't that long, that I was able to join a management training program and was sponsored by that store manager who gave me my first opportunity. And so, I think it would be wrong of me to say that I sort of had this carved out career path. I knew where it was going. And at the end of it was called the chief exec role. I mean, I never would have dreamt that would have been, the journey that I could have been on. And I always felt that I was, when I was a grocery manager, I thought, well, the next job I want to be is a food hall manager. And when I was a food hall manager, the next job I want to be is a deputy store manager. And I don't think, in that first 10 years that I really gave a huge amount of thought to, what the sort of 15-year view would be and, what would be at the end of it. I think that I worked, I worked hard. I think that's like everybody. You work hard. Yeah. You put in, the efforts required. I did find that I had a bent for the industry, but that's mostly because it was about people. I've just always had a strong belief that if you treat people in the right way, it doesn't matter whether they work with you, for you, or you work for them, then inevitably that will work in your favour. And so that's the way I've always believed in working. So I think in those early days, it was very much about just work hard, and prove that you've got something to add. And if I was delivering that, then I got, sort of asked to take on another role, whether it was a grocery manager or even when I, as I say, when I joined Asda. I joined Asda in 1992 as a store manager. And, at that point I was in my sort of early 30s. And, before the end of my 30s, I was on the board. I would never have done that. And I think some of that came from that hard work, but some of it also came from, the mentoring I had from individuals around the company of all levels.
Do you think there's any danger with all of the advances in technology and the way the industry is shaped, that we're going to lose those stories of shop floor to boardroom?
Yeah, I worry about it. But I'm a dinosaur. I'm 56, and the company I work with, one of the companies I work with now, Newton, we're populated by hugely bright, ex-graduates. Everything's, their whole life is surrounding technology and AI, and the way in which we run our business is very focused on that way of working with each other. So, I'm a sort of late learner, and realizing that technology is an important part of how we do business. And certainly the last 6 months has shown us that. I do, though, feel, and, I might be a lone voice on this, that I think it is harder to start at sort of 16 and end up running a big grocer, as I had the benefit of doing. It's the breaks are different. I think that, unfortunately, there are sometimes more hurdles to jump and hoops to climb through than there was, sort of 30 years ago. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, it's a moot point. It's just that, it's different. And if you think I was at the age of 20, I was the store manager of a Morrison's store, taking £500,000 a week with 250 colleagues. Well, that's, I think in my Asda life, it wasn't about age necessarily, it's about giving accountability and responsibility. And I'd like to see a bit more of that energy, and gamble come back into the industry. I think Aldi are pretty good at it. Aldi, I think, take, people on straight from uni and throw them in and might not seem a great term, but sink or swim, and they produce some great people. And in my early years, whether it was with Morrison's or with Asda, then there's no doubt we produce some outstanding leaders. I mean, look at the portfolio of leaders that have come out from the Asda business under the stewardship of a number of us, but primarily starting with Archie in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Most of those guys are running or have run, huge, retail organisations or other organisations. So I do think it's harder to make that journey from shop floor to boardroom than it was, 30 years ago. But and I sort of had this twinkle in my eye that it would be nice to see some of that back. You want a balance, I understand.
Yeah, of course.
Cut a bit of the bureaucracy would be good.
Quite. Well, do you think that the DNA of a successful leader in the sector has changed significantly now?
I don't know about it's changed significantly. I think it's changed. So and some of that has been driven by, as you described it earlier on, the technology changes that have happened. The focus is so different now. The breadth of accountability of leaders in any organisation, not just retail, has fundamentally changed. And so, 30 years ago, the focus was slightly different than it is today. So, has the DNA changed? I think it's probably been refreshed. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's the nature of the industry's changing. Margins have changed, labour costs have changed, productivity's changed, technology's changed, propositions changed, range has fundamentally changed. There's a huge amount of activity that's entered the retail space, and those leaders have to adapt to it. Yeah.
So looking now back a little bit, back and a bit forward from where we've just spoken to those, the first time that you were a chief executive at Asda in those first few weeks, just describe what that was like. And did you feel prepared for the role, or was it daunting? What was the emotion like for you taking on the CEO-ship of what became the second largest grocer in the country?
Goodness, I can still vividly picture myself. Not just when I had the phone call from Mike Duke, who was then the executive of Walmart, but it being announced in Asda House, and there'd been we always had a big stage in the atrium Asda House. You may remember that.
Yeah.
Events, and I remember being stood at the side, and Andy Bond had gone on stage because, of course, he was handing over the reins, and the energy and nervousness that was running through my veins, I can tell you, was unbelievable. And I remember a guy called Rick Bendel, who you may or may not remember. Rick was the marketing director. Yeah. He sort of got hold of him by the shoulders and he said, "Pull yourself together. You're about to your company, your team." And the feeling of running a business like that. And it wasn't just because it was a big business. I just loved the people, and over the sort of the time I'd spent in retail, loved the industry. And, so although, goodness, it had some real challenges in terms of, getting up to speed with the responsibility and accountability of the chief exec, because I don't think anything prepares you for that.
No.
You sort of, whilst you're the number two, somebody else is the number one. So there's always somebody you can talk to. Once you're, running a business, then, I think it's very hard to be prepared for it. You learn very quickly by experience. Of course, it's important still to have those mentors. You can pick the phone up, who probably aren't involved in the company.
Yeah.
Sometimes just to have a quiet 5 minutes with, or to sound off at, or just to get advice. And certainly I would say in my first year, I used a population of people on a regular basis just to talk about their experiences, how they'd managed the transition between, the boardroom table to the chief exec role, and how I could learn from them.
And of course, you took over at an extraordinary time in the industry. I mean, looking back now, it's clear that the incredible speed of change that we're seeing now, the foundations were kind of being put in place at that time. The arrival of the discounters in a large way, the sort of first wave of digital transformation. Can you just describe, what was the environment that you took Asda over in at that time? What were the dynamics going on in the sector?
So we were one of, the big four retailers that really shouted value. So, our price position was recognised by all that we had the lowest priced baskets. And of course, when the discounters decided to invest, then they created a delta between our position and theirs. And of course, that fundamentally changed the sector forever. So even though you look now, some years on, that, others are trying to challenge the discount formats. Tesco in particular are being very aggressive on price. But it's taken, whatever it is, 11 years to get to that place where, there really is a challenge to the way the discount is going to grow. And then, of course, it's the growth of online. And I remember some of the battles, I had with our parents, because, of course, online grocery was going nowhere in the States. So, and as a business, we were already growing our online presence, and the need to invest margin and capital into a new channel called online was pretty countercultural to a business like Walmart, for all the right reasons for them, because, of course, they've got huge investments in large stores. So I think for Asda and also for the sector, from 2010 to 2015, there really was a significant shift in the way in which discounters and online have changed the face of retail. And of course, it's not going to go back.
No.
It's, if anything, the last 6 months have probably just paused the growth of discounters and accelerated the online space. But you could write a forecast today that the discounters are going to become aggressive again. I mean, why wouldn't they be? Yeah. So, those early days for me in taking over from Bondi, then, it was, I had a different set of issues to face into, which was, of course, a hugely profitable business.
Yeah.
Deciding how to balance that profitability was a challenge for the corporation.
I remember watching you speak in 2013, and I think one of the reasons that we were so keen to hear you at the time was that Asda, under your leadership, was setting the pace of change, particularly around digital transformation at the time. And there was no sense that you were just sort of sitting back and watching this stuff happen. You were very keen to react to it. And I always admired how brave you were at that time. You were happy to trial things. If they didn't work, you moved on. But how did you go about changing the culture at Asda to embrace that kind of innovation and embrace that level of risk and that sort of trial and error approach to things? And how did you land that with your people, both, I guess, those colleagues, but also the parent company?
Yeah. I think there are two types of chief execs. There's managers and leaders, and I'm probably being controversial.
Yeah.
Managers sort of look after the status quo and just keep things, going without really rocking the boat. And I would say that leaders are those people that take a brave position. See a forecasted opportunity, or just have a belief, an internal belief that something's going to change, and they're going to lead their way, lead the company through that change. And I wouldn't say I got everything right, but you can point to leaders through the industry, through the decades, from other retailers that have taken a similar approach. But of course, it doesn't matter what strategic intent you have to change the direction or support the direction of the company. You've got to take people with you. So finding the right team, energizing the right team, whether at board level or within the organization, is absolutely fundamental. And so, I spent a good period of my time in those early months and years in ensuring I've got a very capable, strong executive team that could embrace the level of change that I believe we were going to go through. So, something like Judith McKenna.
Yeah.
Judith was the CFO when I took over, and I promoted her to become the Chief Operating Officer, because I saw in her a different level of capability that would not only support the Asda business, but of course would also help influence the parent company. And I had a board of directors that I think were at the peak, were probably the best in the sector. But I'm biased because it was part of my team. But then I think to get the transformation through to the grassroots, then you have to establish a transformation agenda which is separate to the norm. There's been a long-held belief that you can try and to leverage change in the day-to-day. That's incredibly difficult in my view. You have to have a team that are focused on transformational change, working with the rest of the organization, whether that's about process change in a store, whether it's about technical changes in terms of new business and new channels like online, or the way in which we buy. I've always believed that you have to have that transformation focus and somebody to lead it. And I had a guy called Mark Ibbotson, who you may or may not remember.
Yeah.
Mark was an outstanding operator, and recognised in him that he could help change the way in which the business was being led in operations. And of course, he ended up moving out to the US and running a big part of their business. So, I think that to effect change in the right way, you have to have the right people. You have to have a transformation agenda, and you have to have a real sense of belief and bravery to see it through. I certainly believe in the sort of 3 or 4 years in my early tenure as chief exec, we were on that flywheel, and of course we're generating, both very, very strong top line growth, but also strong profitable growth.
And you talk obviously very passionately about the people, that was ultimately what continued to attracted you in the first place, the sector, and continued to attract you. Is there a sense with all the technical innovation and the digitalization that we are going to lose the relevance of people within retail, or do you think that it will always be an industry that is based around the colleagues that work in it?
Well, it's a people industry. I don't think that's going to change, although, of course, there's going to be less of them. The productivity challenges to all industries, and certainly to retail, is about how can you bring technology in to change the shape and the workload of either the retail stores or other parts of the supply chain. So the one thing I really do hope isn't a strategy, isn't it? Is it? So I really hope businesses plan for is retaining personality. I think the personality of the colleagues that work within the stores or elsewhere is absolutely fundamental to a competitive advantage and the way in which customers behave, either online or offline. So, I'm not an overly religious man, but I would pray that that businesses and leaders don't lose sight of the importance of the type of people, the interaction between the colleagues and customers, and the difference that that can make. And certainly, and I think that in Asda in the early 90s, before my tenure as chief exec, the Asda way of working broke new ground in terms of that interplay between customer and colleague. And It started because of the energy that was created around all colleagues wanting, trying to flatten hierarchies, colleagues working together, and goodness, we didn't always get it right.
No.
We had to make significant people changes. But there was a different belief set. And, I felt very privileged to, work with a group of leaders and colleagues at, one point, 175,000 people, and, had a shared belief that that we could make a difference. And not everybody's on the same page, but I think in most cases we got more right than wrong.
Andy, what advice would you give to a young chief executive around bringing culture to life in such a large organisation? How do you land it with the frontline colleagues?
I don't think it's necessarily only about first-time young chief execs. I think it's about all chief execs, and I've got to say, I would say in any industry. But I used to spend a big proportion of my time walking stores. Maybe that's because I came up through that route. I've been a grocery manager and a food hall manager, and I, understood some of the challenges that the stores were facing. But I would actively chair colleague circle groups, listening to colleagues either in stores or across a region about what was going well and what wasn't going so well.
Yeah,
now, it's not going to, in all cases, change your direction, but it makes you more aware of the decisions you're taking and the impact it has on the front line, both in terms of colleagues and customers. So, I've never forgotten. I can't remember who told me it. It doesn't really matter. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as speaking, because the value that you have from hearing that feedback has a huge benefit. And of course, I think now the vehicles for listening are changing, which is through technology. At Newton we use a framework called Yammer, where our colleagues can go on and share what they feel. And we're not in the hundreds of thousands of colleagues, we're in the hundreds. But it's an opportunity to share how they feel. And, as a leadership group, we see it every day. And I think that's just so important, because, lest you forget what it's like at the sharp end, because businesses, if they do, will probably become a cropper at some point in time.
Finally, I'd like, I know this is incredibly difficult, but sort of looking into the crystal ball, what do you see as the prospects for retail, British retail, over the next 3 or 4 years? And what are the big sort of issues that leaders have got to get their hands around and grapple with and successfully navigate, do you think, now?
I mean, well, it's one thing for certain is it's going to be an exciting time, isn't it? It's been exciting. Right. The last 10 years is going to be another exciting 10 years coming towards us. Just take my old business, the Asda disposal by Walmart. What's that going to do to the industry? The big four, how's that going to play out? You've got a very different, if that deal goes ahead, then they're going to have a very different ownership structure, very different way of working. So I think, the innovation that's going to have to come into the market to retain competitive advantage is only going to accelerate. We're going to see a higher participation of online sales. Amazon have led the way in general merchandise. If you sort of turn the clock back 15 years and said we'd have this business that would be having the sort of market share in general merchandise that they have, people have said you were barking mad. Was now, I think, it's goodness, well, what's next? Yeah. Fashion is going to accelerate online, and, grocery will as well. Of course, the battleground will be about fulfillment costs if it's an online space. And, there are experimentation agendas, happening now, aren't they? Amazon Prime is free delivery. Tesco are trying it with their club card members. Goodness, if I had my time again when we introduced home delivery, I'd have probably taken a different route. Click and collect would have been the way forward.
Right.
Because the delivered cost, at some points, somebody's got to pay for it. It's either the shareholder or the customer, isn't it? There's only two routes. So it'll be interesting how that plays out, that battleground for that retail sale. I really do hope that the customer experience remains strong in stores. There is a way of retaining that customer engagement that keeps businesses actively competing against each other. I think price is still going to be hugely. It's a very, very difficult time over the course of the next few years as we try and recover from the COVID pandemic. I mean, that is going to affect all businesses, both in terms of operating margins, as well as the costs of doing business. So, I think that there's a really challenging time ahead in terms of businesses, readjusting, transforming to what a world post-COVID will look like. And some of that will be about channel shift. It would be a sad place if, retailing loses some of that excitement factor in the way which customers enjoy the interaction that they have with the brands that they shop with.
Do you remain optimistic about the sort of the future of the sector and its role in UK society?
Yeah, why wouldn't I? We're a nation of shopkeepers, so it's important that we remember that. I think Napoleon said that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We're some years on from when he said that, and we're still a nation of shopkeepers. There's a changing shape to how the customer shops with the retail landscape, but I think it's still an exciting place to be involved. And although now my involvement is sort of one step removed, I probably spend more time with retailers through the Newton business. Yeah. So as Newton chair, we're excited by the prospects that are happening in the sector. And of course, we're an organisation that we've got teams helping build nuclear submarines, and other teams working on the COVID crisis. So, we're a really broad business that supports the efficiency and productivity agenda. But in retail and manufacturing, there's a huge amount of scope. But the key is, and what we focus on, is how you work with people, which is why I got involved in the company 2 years ago, because I just love that interaction and the fact that if you want to make transformational change, you have to do it with the people on the ground. And you can't just write a report, hand it to somebody and walk away. That's not our style. And I think in the retail sector, that will play an important part in helping the retail agenda stay focused.
Fantastic. Well, a great message to end on, Andy. It doesn't matter what transformation the industry continues to go through, it comes back to the people. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up as ever with you. Thank you for spending so much time with us. Thank you too for Newton for supporting this content and supporting hundreds of families through their support of the Retail Trust as well. I hope everyone has enjoyed it as much as me. Andy, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to talk to you.